transferable skills. I want to welcome Amanda DeFederici to this show. Amanda, take us through your career. I know you had a few different stops before getting to where you are today. So how did that journey begin?
Oh gosh, yeah, quite a few stops. I actually started my professional career as a band teacher. I grew up in the rural South. There's not a lot going on in my hometown, just more cows than people really, but we had a fantastic band program. I love music. I enjoyed education, was a great student. I thought, this is what I want to do for the rest of my life. I went to college for that, graduated, and I spent maybe 2 years teaching and realized, oh, this is absolutely not for me. I am not cut out for this.
Was it the subject or was it teaching in general?
I adore teaching, but it was my natural state of introversion, which I feel like I've matured out of that a bit. But at the time, it was just, I cannot handle this much energy and this many people all day, every day, and manage a classroom. But the subject matter, of course, I've always had, still to this day, really enjoy when I have the opportunity to do something creative and put on a performance. I feel like that's a huge part of my job still. And I'm still using those core skills. And I'm still using pieces of teaching. Like I'll just tell you this. And I think this is one of the most important things I've carried through every single job and career I've had is I'm really obsessed with finding the most succinct and clear way to explain something to someone. Just when I was teaching kids in like beginner band, like how are you going to make that first sound on your instrument? You don't want to screw it up and then get them on the wrong track and you've got to undo all that work. So I was really laser focused on this and I still use it today. Like that, those parts of it I adored, but I just couldn't handle the classroom. I had a friend who mentioned that she had a friend who was going to library school. And I said, that's a thing? What? But I wanted to stay in academia, but I didn't want to be in the classroom and I didn't want to get a PhD either. Library school is a very economical way to do a master's and work in university. So that's the path I took. And I grew up in libraries. I'm a voracious reader. It was a really great fit. I worked at a bookstore in college. And one of my favorite things was when people came in looking for something and then they couldn't find it. It's like you're going on that scavenger hunt of helping them find the information. Working in college libraries was my absolute dream job.
I imagine it's probably similar to how I would feel about working in like a music record shop of years past.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. You are constantly learning things. You are going on scavenger hunts left and right. I don't need to know the answer. I just need to know how to find the answer. And I absolutely loved it. And I was still teaching. This has been like I would say the late 2000s when Wikipedia is just starting to really explode and people are using it. And college students are starting to realize that they can just Google things and copy paste for their papers. And they have no idea how to use library databases. So we actually developed this entire program for our university of teaching people information literacy, which is just how to tell the difference between all these things when they all look exactly the same.
Right.
And then we get into the pandemic and fake news and information, and my head is just exploding because I'm like, oh my God, like librarians totally saw this coming a decade ago.
Yeah. That was the inspiration when you talk about disinformation and fake news.
Mm-hmm.
That was the inspiration for me to really understand and discover the term epistemology. How do we know something that we believe to be true to actually be true? And getting down to
That's
the
right.
origin and following those breadcrumbs back to either original sources or getting critical mass data to fact check and be able to have confidence in what you're saying or what you perceive as truth to actually be that.
Oh, yeah. And just for me, I felt like when I really understood how information is produced, like how does something start with a hypothesis and go through the research process, and then it's validated through peer review and it's published, and then it's picked up by popular science, and then it just becomes a newspaper headline, and like understanding it, that unlocked a world for me. And I was just teaching small classes or one-on-one with people, literally side by side at a computer. Here's how you think about this. Here's how you do this. I didn't realize it at the time, but I was really honing a lot of skills there that actually have come into to be really helpful now in sales,
Yeah.
working with sales teams, because you learn to read people. They'll come to you with a question of say, hey, I need a thing. And they actually train you this in library school to don't immediately give them the answer, probe deeper, because they might think they know what they need, but they don't really know what they need.
You've mentioned right now you have a correlation between drawing a conclusion and that preceded by you mentioning sales. Tell me a little bit about the reason for this and
Mhm.
hear your perspective on that, helping people draw the conclusion themselves.
Yeah, this is another obsession of mine is like finding parallels between things
Hmm.
because it feels like all of these things at their core are so very similar. But so in sales, when you're working with, and I work in tech sales, I was a consultant. People come to us with problems they think our product can solve. And the first thing you do is this whole, they call it a discovery process, where tell me about the problem you're experiencing. And it's a consultation. It's like a doctor trying to get to a diagnosis. They're
Mhm.
getting all of this patient history, whatever you might want to call it. But a lot of times, when people come to you with the problem they're trying to solve, they really only understand the surface level, like symptoms of what they're experiencing. You have to dig a lot deeper, and it's very almost like talk therapy, trying to get to the core of what they're really dealing with.
Yeah.
And then from there, you can pattern match to does our solution actually solve that problem or not? And if it does, how? And what would we do about that? And from there in sales, it's once you've got a fit, then it's about painting the picture of, okay, here's what this could look like for you. Here's how your life would change with this. And that was a big part of what I did. It's like a custom demonstration, a custom environment, and it's a performance really at that point. But you've built all of that trust with that initial discovery and you've proved to them that you understand their problem. Same thing happens in libraries when you're working with a person who needs some information. They might think they need a specific thing, but you've got to dig deeper because your average college student just says, I've got to write a paper about this. And I think this thing, I need 3 articles that explain this. And you start to dig into it. You're just like, actually, no, really, what they're asking you is this. And what you've got here doesn't quite match to that. Let's dig deeper. Let's try something different to find this.
My father was in sales for a very long time. An early principle that he taught us was the power of helping an individual come to the conclusion, to the discovery themselves, which will be far more understandable and powerful than just telling somebody something.
Right.
I'm wondering if you have also used this to help product teams understand the goals. A lot of times we start with here's what we want to build. Let's better understand the problem set to then come up with the product that we need to build to address these issues to get to that goal.
So it's funny you mentioned this because between going from working in university libraries and working with an ed tech sales team, I was actually a product manager. I'll tell you the quick version is that we had been building this information literacy program and rolled it out to the entire university. We were working with a vendor to help us produce a lot of this e-learning material. And they recruited me out of the university to come help them turn this idea into a product. I'm suddenly now working for an ed tech company. I'm a subject matter expert and I'm selling back to the environment that I was working in. I got thrust into product management. I'm helping spec things out and I'm just learning this kind of intuitively as I go because I'm certainly not trained in any of this, but I do know instructional design. I do know the subject matter and I do know the buyer. I was just so fortunate to have people who put a ton of faith in me to let me learn as I went. And I knew that I could make mistakes. And as long as I was learning and iterating and failing fast, that it was going to be okay. We're talking about 2 or 3 or 4 things that are all exactly the same in my mind. I feel like it's a universal truth. And that's the discovery process for sales, a product development lifecycle, what they call the reference interview in libraries, and then also instructional design and how you backwards design for a specific outcome or behavior change that you want. They are all the exact same thing.
I couldn't think of anything to better represent the thesis and theme for this podcast is just that is my own, in this case, discovery of the seemingly unrelated, completely unrelated fields or roles,
Mhm.
and yet the overlap and similarities between them is so interesting and obvious to me now that you effectively communicated that and described it. It's so wild. You ran past a whole bunch of skills, and if you don't mind me asking, first of all, just out of personal curiosity, what is your primary instrument?
Oh, I'm a clarinet player. Yeah, no, I was heavy into band, and I feel like if we're talking about some of the skills from music, I think about this all the time and how the company I'm in now, we almost have I wouldn't call it a bias, but definitely a preference for certain roles for people who've had performance experience or musical experiences, just because obviously the ability to put on a performance when you're working in sales or sales groups is important. And you see a lot of that with either musicians and athletes who can get out there and do it. But there's also a ton of grit involved. You've got to be, what was the phrase? One of my band directors, like, you need to take it to the woodshed
Yeah,
in that problem. You are going to play those same 8 measures 100 times. You're going to play that same piece of music 1,000 times. You can't get bored with it.
right.
You've got to find ways to make it new and interesting and relatable to the audience in front of you.
You need to persevere and you need the work ethic. I don't have the data to support this, but I imagine that there's a lot of individuals who begin lessons at any age and they stop playing very early on just because of how hard it is, as not out of a lack of interest. It is hard getting over those first weeks or months, the
Hmm.
hump of just even the mechanics, the muscles, let alone the cognitive part of understanding to learn music and theory and all that. But you have to have a work ethic and, a like you said, a grit to be able to follow through on that. And it's an interesting observation that there is a unofficial bias that you're saying towards performance musicians. It might just be like a noteworthy item on their resume CV. It demonstrates the work ethic, follow through, and all that. But then
Yeah,
the ability to perform under pressure, among other skills and
yeah.
attributes.
And I think that a lot with salespeople who are former athletes, right? It's a lot of the same thing. Yeah, and music is incredibly competitive. I don't think people realize how cutthroat it can really be. But
Especially in band or orchestra, where you're fighting for your place, you're also fighting for your position within the
mhm.
overall orchestra, you're fighting for that solo.
Yeah, I have that in one of our getting to know you like company bio is I'm a nerd with a competitive streak.
Hmm,
Like I
competitive nerd. I like that.
but I feel too another important piece of this, and this came in really helpful in that product role is that when you're a musician, you are going to have to perform sometimes before you're actually ready.
Hmm.
It's not perfect, but too bad. The show is this date at this time, and you've got to perform. And you've got to be comfortable doing that, knowing that maybe you're not 100% ready. And to me, that's just a mindset that I feel a lot of people struggle with. They feel like things have to be perfect before they put it out there for anyone to see. And it really prevents them from getting things done and making progress.
Have you met an artist, or in this case, specifically a musician, who has ever felt completely ready and perfected their piece?
No, no.
I think that's the
Yeah.
lesson, is that it's never one of the lessons that I was given as an architecture student is design never ends. It only ends when you decide that it has ended because you can continue to iterate and push it further and further.
Yeah.
It's never perfect. And I think if you're striving for perfection, you will always set yourself up for disappointment because
Oh, yeah.
nothing is ever going to be perfect.
Yeah. And I think just the world, especially in tech, you can't wait for perfection
Right.
because the competition will outmaneuver you. You've got to move. And I'm so grateful for the leaders at that company I mentioned that I went to because I almost fell into that trap a few times of feeling like it needed to be perfect. And there were a couple big lessons that I took away from that. And one, my CEO at the time was like, look, it doesn't have to be perfect. It just needs to be directionally correct. Head in the right direction and we will figure out the route from there. But we got to head in a direction. And that I still keep that with me even now. That's when I start to feel like I'm spending too long on something, or it's just no, get it out there. Don't let perfect be the enemy of done.
Mhm.
You had mentioned this earlier about people who feel like they've maxed out their potential in a role. That's part of why I left libraries. As much as I love them, I did feel like I had done about all I could do there. And I had so much a bit of imposter syndrome about making that move into tech. When you're growing up, you have all these ideas about the people around you, and you're like, oh, that person's got a PhD, they're so intelligent. If I ever want to do something like that, I have to follow that path. And I think at some point, and maybe it's when you become an adult, you have this realization that, oh, wait a second, nobody really knows what they're doing.
Yeah.
We're all making this up. If they can be making it up, then maybe I can too. Like I can take some risks and just trust that I know how to figure it out along the way and fake it till you make it kind of thing.
As a musical performer or somebody who has given speeches, lectures, or any kind of performance, the typical suggestion that is given, especially to young children performing for the first time, is cliche, is picture everyone in their underwear, right? I think that's the point, is to humanize everyone and to not make it feel so stuffy or intimidating to the person who
Hmm.
is in the room, let alone leading it. But there were many years where I had that imposter syndrome sitting in a meeting, especially where terms were thrown around that I just didn't know,
Yeah.
or just perceived intimidation, what I'm putting in my own head that, oh, the people on the other side of the table must know a lot more than me. But in reality, it's stepping back and remember, these are just human beings. And at the end of this, they're probably going home to their families too. And they have the same issues that you have. And there's everyone's struggling about one thing or another. And we're all just trying to figure this out in order to deliver the best version of ourselves that we possibly can.
Yeah, absolutely. You'd be amazed like how many conversations I'm in with like leaders of companies selling to people who are in charge of millions of dollars of budget and these huge decisions that they have to make about how to spend it. And everyone is figuring it out.
Yeah.
Like everyone. But I totally hear what you're saying. When I left that product role and decided to sort of focus on sales specifically. I had done some work with sales before. I was very used to hopping on to do a demo or doing like product marketing for the sales team to prepare them. But that was selling to higher ed, which is a lot different than selling to Fortune 100s.
Yeah.
And I got paired up with one of the best salespeople I've ever worked with in my entire career, just really a master. And it was a lot of just smiling and nodding and soaking everything in the sponge. But it was also happening at the same time as COVID, where everyone's working remotely. So it was so humanizing to be talking to, oh, you're the chief learning officer of this company and you're in your home office and I'm in my home office and there's kids running around in the background for video. And it's just, I couldn't have been luckier, I think, to like try to make that transition into that kind of role and have that learning curve while having it also at the same time be like just a new experience for everyone and getting used to doing it this new way.
COVID was the great equalizer. It really
Hmm.
put everybody, I wouldn't say on the same playing field. It made everyone human again. It allowed for a real personal touch. There was a break of formality in a good way.
Hmm.
You worked with somebody in sales who you felt was like the best person that you've ever seen do sales. What made that person so good at sales in your mind?
It's really it I felt like we were very aligned in really getting to the root of someone's problem and understanding it. And it's not just like the technical understanding of, oh, this isn't working and this needs to be tweaked, but it's like understanding the psychological aspects of selling. And it comes back to that whole discovery interview process. They're telling you what they think is wrong, but there are things that they're not comfortable saying out loud yet, or things that they're not aware of saying out loud yet. And it's building trust with them to uncover those things and pull them out and gain their trust. And just an absolute master at doing that. Really, almost just a master at making friends
Yeah.
and actually caring about people's problems. And that kind of trust is just so invaluable. It slows down the sales process. Things take longer, but in the end, it always pays off.
I think so too.
Yeah.
I can run down a list of skills that you've already mentioned earlier in the conversation. The first one you threw out was effective communication. It's always valued and it's always important and it always helps you do your job better. the ability to effectively communicate clearly your thoughts, your ideas, and your goals, whether it is in a proposal at long format, whether it is in an email in like medium format or short format, maybe in a Slack message,
Hmm.
to be able to clearly articulate and outline your ideas in well constructed thoughts clearly and effectively is a tremendous transferable skill.
Oh, absolutely. And I feel like I've benefited from that all at every stop along the way. I think for me, the biggest thing to be an effective communicator is you really have to understand your audience and you have to know what's appropriate for the situation and what's going to resonate best with them. And I felt like I was always really good at communicating through writing. I've got my start in all of this writing instructional materials for people, but then that also transferred into teaching and explaining one-on-one or presentations. But I had a lot to learn when it came to like what you do and don't put into a board deck. You should never embed a spreadsheet into a slideshow.
Mm.
That's just absolutely out of bounds. It's just too much information. No, and I think in spreadsheets. Like that's how I see the world sometimes. If I need to really do something, I'll throw into a spreadsheet and crunch through it. But that's not how most people think.
The audience's eyes glaze over.
Oh God, yeah, yeah, absolutely. Especially if it's your board. You should absolutely not do that. That was a pro tip I got from one of my bosses. So it's understanding the audience, whether it's like someone you're trying to teach or someone you're trying to convey information to, you're trying to persuade, you're trying to educate. It's just lots of different formats. And it has so much to do with the amount of information, what information you prioritize, your tone. Yeah, in my role now that I'm not on the front lines in sales anymore, I'm more behind the scenes doing sales. I enable the sales team. A lot of what I'm doing there is I do all of our RFPs. So I'm constantly writing and built this giant database of questions and answers of like very carefully phrased responses to proposals. And some of it is fairly straightforward and technical. Some of it is more touchy feely. Some of it is things I had run by our legal team because I've got to thread a needle. There's no end to the variances in communication styles and how you leverage them and when to leverage them.
If you can identify and then just describe some of the skills that you have leveraged and transitioned from your previous careers into what you do now.
Problem solving is a through line. And I just feel that's just a universal truth. That's backwards design, problem solving, product design, sales, discovery. It's all the same thing. Again, I take that MVP approach where it's just get something out there. If it sucks, they will tell you and you can fix it. But that's way better than spending the time to research it yourself because they're the expert. They know what they need. I think also some of this is just more like maybe it falls back on your communication, but building a business case for things and not just a project plan of what I want to do and how I'm going to do it, but why should I be allowed to do a thing? Why should we invest in doing a thing a certain way? That was a huge takeaway from that first tech job. And that served me really well. You've got to make a case for things that's legitimate. It's not just a desire you have to do a thing, but really do the work, like crunch the numbers, figure out how is this actually going to save us time or save us money, and put that into writing before you even think about approaching somebody to ask for something.
Right.
I really benefited from going even back to the library. It was such a small library. There were only a handful of us. And so I managed our budget, our collection development. I had to make the decisions about where we spent money. And I really learned how to deal with the numbers there on a smaller scale. And then when I got into these other roles, at least I had some founding in that. And luckily, my mom was a banker growing up, and my father was self-employed. He was running his own business. I did have some experience with numbers.
Yeah. You came by it honestly.
Yeah.
Whether it comes from your parents, your peers, or an individual that you report up to at some point in your career, mentors are so important. The people that give you the support, allow you to fail fast so you can iterate and learn from it, but then also
Oh, yeah.
to give you the scaffolding and permission to try things out and to learn from your mistakes, but to also give you the guidance to grow. I think that's such an important thing.
Absolutely. I was incredibly lucky to land in places where that was the culture. And once I knew how to recognize that culture, I've sought it out in every company that I've moved on to since then. You learn what's the vibe of a place? Is
Yeah.
this place passing the vibe check in the way I want to work?
Those are your values.
Mhm.
Maybe there is an element of luck in that you stumbled upon the job rec that was posted online. Ultimately, when you are interviewing, you have probably had instincts based on your past experience that are in line with your values of what you want,
Mhm.
culture and environment, opportunities, and so on, that has helped you make those decisions to accept an offer at those places. So maybe luck is a small part of it, but my assumption is that it comes from experience and intuition.
Yeah, maybe. I do. uh, People told me I do seem to have a spidey sense about some of these things. And when something's not quite feeling right, or okay, it's time to move on. Once you do have those opportunities where you're really involved in like how the business is operating and how your leaders are making decisions, you can start to read the signs.
That's emotional intelligence.
Yeah. And I just would encourage people, and even the people I've mentored too, is that you're never going to have those opportunities to really understand how the business works if you don't raise your hand and volunteer for things.
That's right.
There have been so few times in my whole career where I've said no. I've taken jobs that I knew I was not ready for. I've taken responsibilities that I was like, I'm just going to have to smile and fake my way through this until I figure it out. But I always figured it out. People don't give themselves enough credit. When it comes down to it, it feels really intimidating, but none of this is rocket science.
Right.
I just found my way. And as I directionally correct, right? And there are things that I knew I did enjoy and didn't enjoy. So I headed in that direction. And then here's some more choices. I'll head in that direction. I think it'll take you through some wild places and some challenging times. At the end of the day, I feel like I have a really good handle on where I fit into my organization and the value I bring. I'm able to work with so many different groups and departments. Now I'm in my role, I sit in a nexus of all of the different departments that are market facing, and then back to product and back to leadership. It's a fantastic place to be. It's so fun. And it is such a good mix of that variety I was talking about before, where you get the creative work and then you get you know what, I got to go spend a couple hours on the spreadsheet. And I need that in my life.
Sure.
I think I would just leave you with, this is a piece of advice that my father gave me actually, when I was thinking about making that first big move from libraries into tech. And I was really unsure of myself. That imposter syndrome was like really strong. And I'm just like a kid, honestly. Like, I have no idea what I'm doing. And he told me, he said, what has power over you, it's not what you think about yourself. And it's not what other people think about you. It's what you think other people think about you. I've kept that with me ever since. It's really all in my own head. So long as I'm out there, I'm learning fast. I never let anybody outwork me. Never. Then I'm going to be fine.
You're very competitive, especially with yourself.
Oh, yeah.
You're trying to outperform yourself and making sure you're ahead of the pack and that you're pushing yourself. That's great advice. Truly, we both in this episode have shared advice from our respective fathers. I think we're always trying to live up to them, right?
That's right. Yeah. It's, I don't know, competitiveness, neuroticism. I'm not sure, but I just try to make it work.
If it's a healthy balance and it's actually leading you towards success and fulfillment and happiness, then I don't think it's a problem, whatever you call it. Well, Amanda, this has been a super interesting, truly delightful, enlightening, engaging conversation. And I just want to thank you for spending this time with us and sharing your story and your skills with our audience.
It was a pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you to Tamar Rubin for recommending Amanda as today's guest, and to you, our listeners, for joining us on this episode of Transferable Skills. Remember, if you found value in today's episode, please subscribe to the podcast, leave a review, and share it with your friends and network. Your support helps us reach more people who could benefit from these stories. Transferable Skills is produced by Cackle Media and music by Cost Monkey. We'd also like to thank our sponsor, Handily. Your support makes this podcast possible. Head over to gethandily.com to video chat with pros on demand for expert advice on your home DIY projects. And don't forget to use coupon code MADSKILLS to get your first 15-minute session free. For more resources and inspiration on leveraging your skills for a successful career transition, visit our website at www.cacklemedia.com. Follow us on social platforms at Cackle Media for updates and join our community of listeners who are all about embracing change and growth. If you have any questions, feedback, or want to share your own career pivot story, email us at skills@cacklemedia.com. We'd love to hear from you. Thank you for listening, and remember, the skills you've gained can take you anywhere. Until next time, keep exploring those transferable skills.